If you've played Armored Core 6 before, you know how absolutely incredible some set pieces are. Like during the mission Breach the Carmen Line, where you get to channel your inner anime protagonist energy, facing off against a whole fleet of incredibly humongous ships while your AC is temporarily supercharged. Or when the combined might of the corporations and their opposing factions all come together to take down the seemingly indestructible Iceworm. These encounters are some of the most memorable and intense you'll find in any recent game releases, and honestly they are not really amazing because of their incredible difficulty, complex mechanics, or even sheer novelty. They are amazing, thanks to the out-of-this-world storytelling, character development, and unparalleled immersion. Armored Core 6 juggles brilliantly, despite what some critics might conclude. And that's not to say these encounters are completely devoid of challenge or are boring gameplay-wise. Not at all. It's just that they are not really meant to serve that purpose. Taking the Iceworm as an example, it exists solely to make you go, wow, holy shit, we're going to take that big motherfucker down? And it completely nails that feeling, giving you a sense of just how urgent it is that it gets taken down, even if that means that everyone has to side with people that they hate. This is exactly why it's generally a very beloved boss in the game, and why a lot of people immediately point at it and say, oh, the worm from Armored Core 6, given how instantly recognizable it is. We surely need more things like these, not only so they can become pillars of individuality for a game, but also because they are a kind of dopamine anchor that allows things to switch up here and there in an unexpected way. And for that, I think they are incredibly valuable. However, where I think Armored Core's fights truly shine, are when there's an even playing field between the player and the obstacle in their way. Nowhere can that be seen better than in any AC versus AC battle, be it in the arena or during missions, as these ultimately are the closest the games can ever get to testing your absolute limits, teaching you what is possible or what isn't inside the confines and rules of the game, the same rules the player has to follow and work their way around, which in turn are also applied to other AC pilots, demanding you utilize everything at your disposal to secure the win, all the while exploiting the components of rivalry, relatability, and natural human competitiveness to work as motivation to overcome those same obstacles. We all know how we felt after accepting to turn on the red guns during the alternate version of Attack the Dam Complex, having to outmaneuver both Iguazu and Volta at the same time. Or when later, in Defend the Dam Complex, we find ourselves having to face a gauntlet of not 2, but 3 different ACs, with the possibility of dealing with them all simultaneously if we don't eliminate King or Chartreuse before Raven arrives. This pushes the player to the limit. These opponents are not gigantic set-piece boss fights that have a specific way of being dealt with, or giant glaring weaknesses to compensate their otherwise near invulnerability, nor the boss that kind of mimics what the player can do but completely juiced up archetype, like what happens when fighting against air, at the end of the Fires of Raven playthrough. Instead, they just ask the player to engage the fight fair and square, well, as much as possible given the circumstances, learning the limitations of their craft and the opposing pilot's craft, coming much closer to a true test of skill and synergy with the machine, rather than going through the motions with very little agency. There is a lot to be said about either type of boss archetype, but what I'm really interested in exploring right now is what sits in the middle, the hybrid. This is the type of boss fight that has layered approaches, a varying degree of mechanical difficulty, and incredible potential for visual spectacle, while simultaneously pulling off the miracle of not being too repetitive, lacking in game-established narrative connection or the intimacy created by developing a sort of rivalry with a character that persists throughout the game's story and world building. These fall into the bosses that are actually the entire level while not being boring archetype. And I want to present my case on how they are actually incredibly clever when done right, but also incredibly disappointing when done wrong. To that effect, we're going to be looking at 4 distinct examples of this type of boss fight, 2 of them where the concept is well realized, and 2 where it falls short of the established premise. Let us start off with the good ones first, shall we? This is the Spirit of Motherwell, an arms fort designed to be a walking giant hexapod aircraft carrier, filled to the brim with missiles, absurdly huge cannons, and armed with machine guns in any little crevice you can think of. This shit is basically war on 6 legs. Now, the Motherwell itself is a bit outdated in comparison to some other gargantuan structures present in the 4th generation. Despite this, its armor plating is so strong that nothing can really go through it, which is definitely a problem considering we are tasked with taking it down by one of our employers in the events of Armored Core for answer. Fortunately for our wallet, but unfortunately for the hundreds or thousands of people operating this thing, the Motherwell has an incredibly glaring vulnerability in its design. If somehow something manages to come close enough to it without being vaporized, taking out its external missile silos and main gun batteries will cause a chain reaction of fires inside its storage compartments, effectively leading it to explode from the inside. I think you can see where we're going with this. Just strap an AC to a fucking rocket booster, get in, wreck that shit without dying, and get out. That's exactly what we do, and this is how it plays out.
Commence mission. Destroy the BFF arms fort, Spirit of Motherwell. First, the VOB will let you quickly close in on the target. This is real high-speed combat. You'll need 100% focus.
The boss fight starts as soon as we get in range of the Motherwell's main cannons. Here, we need to avoid getting shot down before reaching the cannon's aiming dead zone. To close the gap, we control our next while it's strapped to a Vanguard Overboost, or VOB for short, which essentially lets us play ace combat for a minute or so. Unfortunately, these auxiliary boosters don't have unlimited fuel, being discarded when it completely runs out. It's here that the second phase of the boss fight kicks in, where now we have to reach the arms fort without getting ripped to shreds by the insane barrage of shorter range missiles, this time using our next's own propulsion and maneuverability. The terrain itself is designed with the consideration that even slower ACs can make it to the Motherwell by making smart use of dunes or the abandoned buildings along the way, as they are perfect cover for incoming fire. After successfully getting up close and personal, the third and final phase of the boss fight will start. With the Motherwell's whole arsenal pointing directly at you, missiles flying everywhere, rotating turrets and deployed normal ACs along its many runways, you'll have to pull off some serious dodging, as to not get increasingly chipped down by all the projectiles coming at you. The main cannons are not a threat at this range, since they cannot keep up with how fast your next is. However, they are quite tough, and you can't afford to be a sitting duck shooting at them until they go down, so your best bet will be taking care of those missile silos, which you need to destroy anyway. This last phase is really good at making you feel like you're rewarded for being a great pilot. If you want to S-rank the mission and minimize repair costs, you'll have to pay attention to everything around you at breakneck speeds, and the way you navigate the encounter is up to you. So, although you don't really need to learn any moveset or fight patterns, you do need to combine everything you've learned about piloting a next up to this point to be able to get the job well done, like a professional. This boss fight especially teaches you how important clean and efficient movement can be to master the game's mechanics, since until you get to a point where you can chain quick boosts like a madman, or develop incredible awareness to track a lot of things coming at you at once, you'll always have a skill ceiling to reach. After the silos are out of the equation, the boss fight is practically over, since now it's just a matter of wrecking the useless main cannons and watching the Motherwell fall apart from the inside.
Mission complete. Now you can really call yourself an elite mercenary.
The cherry on top of the cake that is this mission is how the final cutscene plays out, where you finally get your payoff for pulling off what is, according to the in-game narrative, an incredibly legendary feat. Fast forwarding over to Armored Core 6, we can see how the mission, Destroy Weaponized Mining Ship, draws many incredible parallels to the encounter with the Spirit of Motherwell. A hulking mechanized beast dominates the horizon. That's the RLF's mining ship, now converted to be a walking fortress. Primarily thanks to the retrofitting of the EBO 309 Strider laser cannon onto the ship itself. The Strider serves as the Colossus' main long-range artillery, and it must be avoided at all cost. Sounds familiar? This time around, the major projectile threat is a bit more telegraphed, so some ground troops are deployed around the area in order to distract you from the beam itself. The first phase of the boss fight consists in managing your attention and energy in such a way that you can avoid getting hit by the Strider's laser, clear the RLF's MTs as to not eat a stray shot, hopefully dodge the close-range missile clusters the ship will deploy as you get closer to it, and finally, find a way to halt its movement. I am completely in love with the aesthetic of the Bonadea Dunes where this fight takes place, especially how the sandstorms lower visibility and sort of hide the Strider in this ominous gigantic silhouette. Visually, it's absolutely incredible. Once close to the mining rig, you'll quickly find that taking down its right hind leg can severely slow the whole thing down, effectively ending phase 1 of the boss fight with an absolutely stellar display of scale, weight and dust effects that still leaves me grinning with joy even after clearing the mission so many times.
Confirmed. Strider leg compromised. It's going down. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Alright, now we've got a foothold to get on the deck.
Phase 2 begins as you make your way to the ship's main deck. Once again, mirroring the Motherwell, this walking fortress is filled to the brim with artillery, so you'll have to maneuver around incoming fire. After having a foothold on the behemoth, you'll be prompted to take out 4 of its generators scattered around the ship. You can go at them in any order, but you'll need to be wary of the Strider's eye as it can catch you off guard with some laser beams.
Sub-generator destroyed. 3 to go. 2 to go.
Remember the hardships that made us. Remember that we put us on earth, we deserve.
Just 1 left. All sub-generators.
Phase 3 starts and ends with the final task of rushing the Strider and blowing it up to smithereens.
Now you've got the target in your sights. Time to finish these 6-2.
If you're rocking the right loadout, you can even one-cycle the thing without it ever having a chance to fire back, in which case the only thing left to do is getting the fuck out of there, because the Strider's going critical, and it's not going down without a big boom. Admittedly, this Phase 3 does have some interaction, contrary to what I just showed you, but unfortunately the fact I can just destroy the Strider without even seeing it attack me is one of the major criticisms I have with how these types of fights are balanced, especially here in Armored Core 6, but more on that later. Now we sit back and enjoy the glorious vision of mecha war crimes being committed in 4K. Just make sure you turn on Assault Boost and skedaddle out of the ship, not only because you want to get a good angle to take screenshots of what's to come, but also because you might potentially get caught up in the giant explosion.
See that 621? The Strider's blowing itself up. A fitting end for something built to fail.
With a name as Sigma as Gigabase, one would think this mission would pitch you up against a badass floating fortress that requires some consideration to take down. Unfortunately, that is not the case, since the boss fight is definitely not Giga-based. The setup for this mission involves a detailed brief about how dangerous this arms fort is, especially considering how it's being escorted by an entire fleet. So the mental image I create going into it consists in a very large-scale fight between a single next and dozens, if not hundreds, of very threatening warships, all culminating in a battle of attrition with the heavily fortified, unsinkable GigaChat. Ultimately, that is barely anything of what we get here. Nothing in the mission poses any threat, making me resent this whole thing for wasting an incredibly powerful soundtrack and great setup on such an unengaging fight. Here's how it goes.
Commence mission. Destroy the arms fort Gigabase. It's being escorted by the 8th Fleet. Use the VOB to close in on Gigabase. Watch out for long-range fire. This arms fort is a defensive stronghold. Don't underestimate its firepower. VOB nuke depleted. Prepare for normal battle maneuvers. VOB depleted. Purging. Good, you're in close.
Phase 1 you get in. Phase 2, you attack that sorry excuse of a boss fight a couple of times, and it completely crumbles away like it's made out of paper. No threat from its weapons, no additional hassle with all the ships around it. It just quite literally evaporates, leaving you with this feeling of being absolutely underwhelmed by the encounter. Noting that it took more time for you to get here on the VOB than to actually destroy the thing itself. I could point out some criticism here, but honestly, the footage just speaks by itself. Let's get to a more interesting example.
You'll be going down deep, and there's no guarantee you'll come back. Still, you're the only one who can do this. I'm counting on you to reach the coral.
Main system activating combat mode.
Commence mission.
Let me just get this out of the way first. Underground Exploration Depth 1 absolutely has no glaring inherent flaws if you only play this mission once. The tension, pacing, atmosphere, and payoff all work flawlessly, and it serves as an incredible opening act for the ensuing chapter, with tons of character development and story implications. And even the novelty of the whole encounter itself can be quite fun, especially since it's very clearly a reference to Armored Core 4's Defend Megalis. Where it really starts falling apart is when you go through repeated playthroughs, especially since it's a mandatory mission in any route for all the different endings. So you'll have to play through this at least 3 times if you want to see all the game has to offer. What's bad about it then, you ask? Well, for starters, it just does not offer much in terms of engaging gameplay. Sure, you get to clean up the elevator at the top. It's always rewarding to see fodder enemies blow up into a million pieces while you effortlessly shoot everything down. That's all fun and games. The thing is, the journey to the depths has one giant flaw. Dealing with Nepenthes, the actual boss that sits right at the bottom shooting lasers, missiles, and generally just being an insufferable pain in the ass. Before we get there though, Phase 1 ends with a little ambush. This is just another routine cleanup, and while these targets do present a slightly bigger challenge, they ultimately just end up contributing to slogging down the whole sprint down the bottom, especially because there's like a good whole minute of just waiting around, finding a button to open the gate, and then resuming the mission.
I'm setting a marker.
2 repair kits remaining.
Did you find an access point? Good job sniffing that out.
Unauthorized access detected. Transitioning to phase 1.5.
With that out of the way, Phase 2 is about to start. The Nepenthes automated security weapon is designed after the concept of the actual real-world carnivorous plant of the same name. Nepenthes is a pitcher plant that sustains itself by luring in prey from the outside and having them wander right into their pitfall trap. This whole mission, and consequently boss fight, is a scaled-up version of that natural hunting mechanism, but modified to keep intruders out instead of luring them in. It's actually an incredible concept, and when taking into account all the context around the reasoning behind this expedition, it really does fit in. Sadly, as much as the concept might be good, it really just devolves into a really fucking grating section of slowly floating downwards, avoiding incoming fire or tanking it, and jumping from platform to platform. There's an additional factor added into the mix after you reach a certain section where you get these sneaky fuckers sniping you from across the chasm, making it even more grating since you can't just wait out the Nepenthes firing cooldowns in peace and quiet. For better or for worse, you don't really even need to interact with the little fuckers, and you can just keep doing your thing until you reach the thingamabob down below.
You've got it in your sights now, 621. Just need to get a little
We're here. It's finally time to face the big bad and get some action. We just need to get in range and... oh, it's Gigabase all over again. You just shoot at it until it blows up. All that build up, all that hassle to get here. And you just keep aiming for the neck waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever does. At least you get some pretty fireworks and are able to celebrate it being over, for the 20th time. Seriously, couldn't we have had a little reward right at the end when finally confronting the thing? I don't know, just giving it more health and a small moveset, with shit to dodge while tearing it down would have been at the very least more interesting. This is why this boss fight is actually disappointing, because it only works well once. After exploring those 4 examples in quite a bit of detail, we can now hopefully get to discussing what the pros and cons are for this type of approach to encounter design. What Armored Core is doing here is basically turning entire levels into one single boss fight, something that honestly has the potential to be so much more than anything we've seen so far. Designing these things is a very tough balancing act for the developers, because on the one hand, it makes for some very memorable sections the player might keep in their mind for a long time, and on the other hand, it can be potentially detrimental to the whole experience from a gameplay standpoint, since the fine line between interactive movie and actual game sometimes overlaps a little too much in almost all the instances these are attempted. I can't help but love the idea, but let's actually break down some of the core, no pun intended, reasons as to why it's simultaneously good and bad, the strong suits and flaws of this type of encounter, if you will. I'm always an optimist, so let's list what I think the entire level as a boss category has to offer on a positive note first. By the very nature of it being an entire level, a really unique type of layered engagement and combat buildup can be achieved to amp up the more explosive sections of the fight. There are all these different phases that require you to do different things. It keeps you excited and on your toes. Basically, the whole setup of discovering the solutions as you go has the potential to really set itself apart from a regular pattern-based boss fight, where the goal is usually more about learning through repetition rather than improvising as you go. Granted, there's still a lot of hand-holding in current iterations of these fights. They can be unpredictable, yes, but they would benefit from leaning even more into it in my opinion. I can't really talk about this type of mission without mentioning just how much eye candy everything always is. It's undeniable how, when done right, these fights sell the sense of scale, speed, and sheer awe factor, at least the way From Software usually does it. There's something about these interactive set pieces that just make them stand out a lot, and I would bet most of you Ravens can very well remember your first time going up against the Motherwill, the Answerer, or the Strider. Finally, I think the fact these are usually tied into critical plot points, or at the very least big, established, important players in the general scheme of things, overcoming these behemoths just activates something primal in our brains. I think it's all about the odds and payoff. We usually see something very intimidating that needs being dealt with, and when we see ourselves on the winning side of the clash, it just makes us feel like we are part of the world. We are that Raven, that pilot that took down that son of a bitch big impossible fucker 9000, just by sheer skill alone. We are just built different. When it comes to the bad, well, my reasoning is actually quite straightforward. Usually most of these fights really either suck or feel like a grind on repeated playthroughs, because they are simply not challenging enough. Mechanically, there isn't much to do outside just figuring out where to go, and occasionally pulling off some sick piloting. That's something that could definitely be addressed moving forward. There's no reason why things can't get a bit more complex. Trust us, we're Ravens. We can overcome difficulty. This same point also feeds into how less sometimes is more when it comes to the quantity of these types of encounters over the course of a game. In the case of For Answer, for example, most of the arms forts are supposed to represent these incredibly tough pieces of tech that not even average nexts have a chance at beating, without some sort of genius pilot going on a spree. Yet, we end up fighting so many middling ones that pose no threat whatsoever, that when we do actually get a cooler fight, it just feels like the whole veil of gravitas and urgency is gone. Fewer and better is what I'm trying to say. Look, I'm not trying to convince anyone that any specific type of boss is superior. In fact, honestly, I retain my opinion that 1v1 AC on AC fights are still peak Armored Core boss design. But I think these set-piece type bosses get a lot of flack and not enough praise for what they are trying to do. Their track record isn't great, and more often than not we get plenty of disappointing duds. But once in a while, when all the stars align, and we do get to experience a good fight in this style, it just makes you transcend into a full-on mecha bliss. I think they are underrated for what it's worth. Underrated because they're either always seen as a set-piece only boring filler section, a snooze fest with no potential for cool and memorable gameplay moments, and very often perceived as lazy attempts at artificially taking away some of the player agency that is beloved and associated with these types of games. These are all valid complaints, but they shouldn't overshadow the idea and thought put behind these concepts. I believe in their potential. I think one day, once all these cumulative dragging points are polished out of the equation, we will truly be able to experience something that only Armored Core can offer. Until then, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and comment down below what your favorite boss in this archetype is and why. For more Armored Core content, subscribe to the channel and as always, stay boosting.